All right, good morning. I'm Darcy Gentleman from the American Chemical Society, and I would like to welcome you to this policy briefing from the 252nd National Meeting and Exposition of the American Chemical Society here in Philadelphia. So welcome to those of you here in the room and to those tuning in online. Today's program is an installation in the ACS Science and the Congress project, which is an educational and informational science and technology policy forum that we started in 1995. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion, which is entitled Citizen Science and Chemistry, Opportunities to Engage, and this is the 221st installment of ACS Science and the Congress. As professional scientists explore the universe, they find instances where more hands, eyes, and voices are needed to collect, analyze, and report data to advance understanding. Citizen scientists are answering the call in greater numbers in chemistry and many other fields via public and private opportunities. Chemistry and other sciences can be integrated within hobbies, and formal or informal learning may include measuring water quality in rivers and lakes, monitoring the daily course of disease or exercise regimens, or weighing in via discussion groups on matters of science policy. Today's panel will give examples of opportunities for citizen science, including ideas for chemists and chemistry enthusiasts to consider. And we look forward to your questions after each of the panelists gives a short presentation. And for those of you watching online, if you would like to ask a question, if you could log in using a Google account, you'll be able to access a question box, and our colleagues here will then be able to voice your question. So, our first speaker today is Dr. Sophia B. Liu, who is an innovation scientist at the U.S. Geological Survey, working with the Science and Decision Center in Reston, Virginia. She has worked on projects in 3 different states and started at USGS as a postdoctoral fellow researching crowdsourcing, citizen science, and civic hacking. So, Sophia?
Thank you, Darcy. So, what is citizen science? Imagine having millions of human sensors. Imagine having millions of volunteers analyze the big data that you're sitting on, or even ground truth your scientific models. That's essentially what citizen science is about. It's a participatory method for engaging the public in any part of the scientific process. But it's a way to get them to be volunteers and help make the science meaningful and relevant to them. Now, we all participate and use crowdsourced data. When I drove up here from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, one of my 2 favorite things to do is use Waze and Google Traffic. Waze provides, that crowdsourced information of people identifying where police are, where hazards are, and then Google Traffic, it's basically using passively the information on how fast your car is going, and that real-time data is then available to you. And that's really the opportunity we have. The fact that we have the ubiquity of internet access available because we have mobile devices on us, maybe even more than one for a person. And the fact that we have low-cost sensors, which you'll learn more about in some of the other panelists, this is an opportunity where we can engage the public and engage the amount of data that's possible to collect. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you today is we recently launched a federal resource called citizenscience.gov. And it basically contains 3 different components. So I'm going to start from the bottom up because that's actually how we started. We began as a federal community of practice for crowdsourcing and citizen science, where we essentially I currently actually co-chair this federal community, and we've been sharing various best practices and lessons learned from the different federal projects that have a participatory component to it. This then led to many of us in this community developing a toolkit, which makes it easy for people to learn from different case studies of federal projects, as well as learn how to create your own project as well and sustain a citizen science project, specifically in the federal context. But it's also just a great way to find some curated resources on citizen science. The third component is a federal catalog, which currently has over 300 projects from 25 agencies. And really this came about by the 2015 White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy Memo that was developed by John Holdren. And this really mandated federal agencies to identify an agency coordinator for crowdsourcing citizen science. So I am currently the agency coordinator for the U.S. Geological Survey as well as the Department of Interior. But also it mandated a development of a federal online catalog. This was meant to make it easy to find these projects. And if you go on the next slide, that one thing I'd like to point out for specifically this audience is you can look at the catalog and identify what kind of projects are related to chemistry. We're interested in building this repository here. But the purpose is to not only allow you to discover what are relevant projects that are out there, especially in the federal space, but also learn about existing projects, how you can adapt it to your own domain, and actually reuse these projects, because a lot of them are intended to be open source or reusable so that they can be adapted to your own specific problem that you're working on. And I just want to emphasize that citizen science is a participatory approach to any part of the scientific process. So you can engage the people not only in just collecting data, but also analyzing data, disseminating data. There are a variety of ways to engage the public in different ways. And sometimes this is really the only way in which we can get this type of information is from the crowd. And so I want to just end with that even though we're saying citizen science, the impact can go beyond science. It's really about why are we engaging the public? What's the purpose and impact that these volunteers can make that can enhance the science but also help them understand the value of the science? When I started at the U.S. Geological Survey, I worked at the National Earthquake Information Center. And I had the opportunity to work on a couple of crowdsourcing projects. One was called Did You Feel It? And that's basically an internet questionnaire people fill out when they feel an earthquake. But we also have a project called Tweet Earthquake Dispatch, where we harvest Twitter data. Anytime someone says they feel an earthquake and tweet that out, we harvest that, and we can sometimes detect earthquakes as quick as 30 seconds because of that real-time data. So there are opportunities available right now to really engage the public in a variety of ways. And I think it's really about how do we engage not only the people, but our users of our science, of our data, and especially this growing technology community that can help expand what we can do with our work, particularly in the area of data science. So with that, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you very much, Sophia. Next, we have Dr. Andrew Torelli, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and the Center for Photochemical Sciences at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. He has organized and participated in numerous science outreach experiences for various age groups and is dedicated to work at the interface of chemistry, the environment, software, and citizen science. So, Andrew?
Thank you very much. I look forward to sharing with you a little bit of the work I've been involved with leading a team of faculty at my institution. We've been developing technologies that help non-professional scientists contribute meaningfully to different investigations in their environment. I hail, as it was mentioned, from the northwest Ohio near Toledo and the western basin of Lake Erie. And as many of you may know, Lake Erie has been suffering from recurrent harmful algal blooms that are pictured here from a satellite picture from NASA. These blooms occur when cyanobacteria feed off of nutrients in the waterways and undergo explosive growth. The blooms, of course, are unsightly, but they're also harmful to the environment and can pose health risks. For example, in 2014, there was an algal bloom that contaminated the water supply for the city of Toledo, and it led to the shutdown of domestic water supply for nearly 500,000 residents. These individuals, the impacted residents, had to rely on bottled water for use and consumption. So my colleagues and I have developed several tools to help study the water supply, and these include smartphone-based tools that will help report, share, visualize geotag data in real time. So this helps distributed teams, including citizen scientists, participate effectively in investigations in their environments. So in the next slide, there's a screenshot of some data that were collected using some of these technologies by community groups that were tracking a particular water quality indicator. So these groups have also collected data sets for other water quality indicators, and we've had teams participate that include students from our classes and other groups interested in issues that affect them in their environment. The software and smartphone apps are meant to streamline the data collection process, simplify data interpretation with some of the custom coloring that you can see in the picture here, and also enhances the impact and engagement by facilitating these distributed efforts that involve multiple participants and with varied experience levels. So another area of focus that we're interested in is addressing the issue of data reliability. So all data are potentially useful. However, having a clear understanding of their reliability means that we can draw appropriate conclusions that are matched with our confidence in the data. And this is a really important issue. So, an example of a problem. Many of the water quality test kits require subjective color matching. So after one would take a colored water, a water sample, you'll add a color indicator solution that will change color according to the concentration of the contaminant in question. And then this colored solution has to be matched with a card in order to decipher the result. That is, to come up with an estimate of how much of the contaminant is present in your water sample. So this subjective color matching can be a problem at times because it relies on people's color perception, and that's varied. So our solution has been to develop a foldable cardboard device, a simple cutout here, that in a few steps along creased lines will fold into an object like this that fits onto a cell phone. The device itself has an inexpensive piece of plastic film oriented right in front of the cell phone camera, and this film operates much like a prism to spread light into a spectrum. There also is a slit in the front and a position for a test tube holding a sample to fit in here. So here's how it works. The cardboard cutout folds up, as I mentioned, fits onto your iPhone, and having the plastic film split the light into a spectrum makes it easier to analyze. So with the device in place, the user would take a picture of a raw light source spectrum by orienting it, for example, to sunlight. The cell phone will capture this raw light spectrum, and you can see that in the first left panel of our image here. Next, the user would take their water sample, add the color indicator solution to it, and allow the mixture to change color. This sample then gets added to the device, and the user will again take another picture using the same light source. Light that travels through the color sample will be changed, and you can see this in the lower spectrum in the middle panel. The spectrum has changed a little bit. The app is designed to analyze these captured images and calculate the concentration, calculate the color, and come up with an estimate of the concentration of the contaminant in question, which depends on what colored solution you're using. So these data can then be posted using the cell phone's GPS coordinates to a web map in real time. That's the last step shown in the slide here to my right. So this avoids the need for the subjective color matching. These are a few examples of simple technologies that can facilitate citizen science by addressing barriers and helping to improve the data reliability. Citizen science certainly is a powerful paradigm, as we'll continue to hear about today. It can yield important data through the use of distributed group effort involving many people despite not having a professional scientific background. In our case of water quality, we stand to access additional information that will help us understand what causes these harmful algal blooms that threaten our community's environment. Thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Our third speaker is Dr. Jennifer Couch, Chief of the Structural Biology and Molecular Applications Branch in the Division of Cancer Biology at the National Cancer Institute of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. She co-leads the NIH Citizen Science Working Group and acts as the NIH Citizen Science and Crowdsourcing Coordinator. Jennifer?
All Right. Well, thank you. As Darcy said, I'm from the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. And I just want to take a few minutes and describe for you a couple of examples of where citizen science and crowdsourcing are making a positive impact in the biomedical research space, and some areas of opportunity that cut across the research spectrum that we support, everything from understanding the basic biological mechanisms that underlie health and disease up through clinical translational behavioral research and epidemiology and population research and the impact of the environment on health and disease. So in the next slide, you can see one of the reasons that citizen science is so powerful in the biomedical space is that patients and healthy individuals are often highly motivated to share data about themselves, data about their environment, and that can be collect or share data that they already have. And they do this for a variety of different reasons, including personal benefit, wanting to better understand the course of their disease and what they might do about it, benefit to others, people with similar condition or disease, and to accelerate biomedical research in general. And this sort of greater than 90% number that you see over here on the left-hand slide comes from an Institute of Medicine report back in 2014, which surveyed a couple of thousand people who were using the social media site Patients Like Me, asking were they interested in sharing personal health data to advance research. And the vast majority were highly interested in sharing their personal health data to advance research, even though most of them acknowledged that there was some risk to sharing that data. So in the next slide, you can see it's not just the data itself, but it's the insights and the community that come along with that data. So we have long supported community-based participatory research where researchers and communities partner to do a research project, and that can be a community defined by a sort of a geographical boundary, or it can be a community of people with a similar disease or condition. And we're seeing that moving more and more into this kind of partnership arrangement where sometimes the community is even driving the question or initiating the research project with the academic researchers. And so, for example, in the middle sort of upper part of this slide, you see a picture of some vegetables. That's from a project called Garden Roots. That was initiated in a community that's in Arizona near a Superfund site where arsenic contaminates the groundwater and the soil. And so the local people were interested in finding out to what extent was that arsenic in the vegetables they were growing in their backyard gardens. And so they worked with academic researchers to come up with protocols and do the sampling and do the analysis to both in their own yards collecting water and soil and vegetables, like in the picture, and also in a controlled greenhouse setting to understand the level of arsenic in the food that they were eating. And this came up with obviously a data set, but also some best practices for gardening in that region. So in the next slide here, you can see that it's, in addition to obtaining the kinds of data that we wouldn't get any other way, the public is clever, they're creative, and they're good at solving problems when they're presented with the right tools to do this. And so we're seeing more and more this done in the format of sort of a game or crowdsourced interactive digital media format. And what you're seeing here in this picture is the game Fold-It, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, where the public has aided in solving the three-dimensional structures of several proteins over the last several years. And in this picture, they're taking it one step further, and the game sort of shows this abstracted version of a protein structure, and you can see in the red was the initial starting structure. Here they've asked the public in an iterative fashion to come in and help design a better structure, something that will interact better. So this is an enzyme that catalyzes the Diels-Alder reaction, and they wanted an enzyme that was more efficient than the one that they had. And you can see sort of up at the top of that image, there's sort of an extra blue helix. That was an additional 13 residues added by this iterative process of biochemists working with the public through this game interface to design a better protein structure. So in the final slide here, I hope I've given you a couple of examples and sort of given you the idea that in addition to collecting data that we wouldn't be able to get in any other way, there are creativities and capabilities and unique insights that come from engaging the public directly in this partnership. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Our fourth speaker is David Sittenfeld of the Museum of Science, Boston. He manages the Forum program there, which engages citizens, policymakers, and scientists in deliberative conversations around emerging scientific and technological issues, including a program called ECAST, which he'll tell us more about today. So, David.
Thank you, Darcy. As Darcy says, in the Forum program I run at the Museum of Science, we convene participatory conversations among diverse publics, scientists, and stakeholders around the societal implications of emerging technologies. And we do this around issues that lie at the intersection of science and society, where science can inform us about a problem, but it can't really tell us what to do because there's an inherent need for societal values and multiple diverse perspectives. So we convene people together to problem solve on these issues in a way that Jennifer just sort of hinted at. We've held over 100 forums on a wide variety of socio-scientific topics in technology and in engineering, ranging from robotics and prosthetics and children and computer use to things like nanotechnology and synthetic biology. The picture you're looking at here is one of 2 day-long forums that we designed for NASA to help inform policies for their asteroid initiative. And the idea is that by leveraging the pedagogy of informal science education and the trusted position that science centers enjoy as conveners in society, we can create substantive, informed, and inclusive conversations that can help advance science policy in new and interesting ways. And in the next slide, I sort of hint how science museums can do this kind of work in 2 different ways, one more informal and one more formal. The first method, which is more informal, is to hold programs that can catalyze a local or a national conversation about an issue that we all think is important for people to consider as a society. And this will allow scientists and engineers to get a picture of the values and perspectives of the people who use the outputs of the research that you all do every day to put crucial societal questions for engagement into the minds of everyday citizens in an upstream manner, and maybe get ahead of the polarization that we know can creep into issues that lie where science and society intersect. So an example of this in the picture you see is one of over 40 forums that will happen this summer at science museums across the country as part of an NSF project we have on synthetic biology. So in the next slide, though, an emerging, important, and potentially complementary model is to actually use the outcomes of these kinds of citizen deliberations to help inform policy in a more formally embedded manner. This is an image from a project I mentioned before that we did for NASA, in which they hired us to design and implement 2 deliberations that provided public input into their policies for planetary defense and deep space exploration. And the idea is that these kinds of activities can help give a voice to everyday lay people in the science policy process while informing government decision-making processes and engage government with citizens in a new and participatory manner. In the next slide, I visualize a network that we launched to try to make this second goal happen. It's called Expert and Citizen Assessment of Science and Technology, or ECAST, which Darcy mentioned. And the idea that this can allow government entities to actually get this kind of input in a reliable and informed way. These groups bring complementary expertise in policy-relevant science and technology content, methods and practices for participatory assessment, and analysis and reporting of outcomes. And the founding partners of this group are Arizona State University, the Museum of Science, SciStarter, represented by Darlene, who will speak in just a moment, the Woodrow Wilson Institute for Scholars, and the Loca Institute. And we've been engaged as a client by governments looking for informed and deliberative ideas around socio-scientific questions from a diverse public. I mentioned our project for NASA, and we have a couple of other ones that I'll mention in just a moment. We have one about increasing community resilience to weather and climate-related hazards at 8 science centers through a U.S. informal literacy grant. And as you'll hear from Darlene, there are interesting ways to combine this with more traditional methods for citizen science and crowdsourced data collection that have been talked about by my colleagues on the panel. In the last slide, I'd like to conclude with a mention of our upcoming project for the United States Department of Energy that will create 5 deliberations on a single day about the issue of nuclear waste and the consent-based siting process for spent fuel. And this process is being co-led by Arizona State University's Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes and by the Museum of Science. This will be a 1-year project for the U.S. DOE as part of a government contract. It will develop and implement 5 day-long citizen forums all on one day this winter to help inform DOE's design of a process for consent-based siting for a nuclear waste repository. The groups will bring 100 demographically selected citizens to each of the 5 sites, and participants will spend a day considering and recommending policies to questions such as, what is the nature of consent? The types of agreement and stipulations that would be needed between a community needing to host a repository, and how agreements would be enforced and monitored. We're very excited to work with ACS and its members on the kinds of things that you're looking at for research. So I encourage you all to consider ways we can work together to engage the public in the societal, ethical, and policy dimensions of the research you're doing. And during the questions, we can talk about some ideas for doing that. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you very much, David. Our final speaker is Philadelphia resident Darlene Cavalier, who is a professor of practice at Arizona State University's Center for Engagement and Training in Science and Society. Her career has been and is dedicated to enabling citizen scientists. She is the founder of SciStarter. She's also the founder of Science Cheerleader, and she is co-founder of ECAST, which David just described for us. So, Darlene.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So SciStarter is a research affiliate of Arizona State University, and it is a place where people go to find opportunities to get involved, opportunities like you've just heard described earlier. It's an opportunity for people to get involved in citizen science projects and related science policy conversations. SciStarter features more than 1,600 active citizen science projects and events from around the world. We have a community of more than 50,000 people who turn to us for their next activity to get involved in, and millions more who come to the website to dabble or learn about opportunities to share with others. In SciStarter, we recruit, we train, and we equip people. We equip them with the instruments needed to get involved in these projects. Someone you know is a citizen scientist. You may be a citizen scientist yourself. If you're a bird watcher and you contribute data to eBird, you're a citizen scientist. 1.5 million observations were shared with this citizen science project in January alone. If you help monitor the quality of water in our nation's rivers, streams, and lakes, like the 1.5 million people who do that in the United States, you're a citizen scientist. And citizen science is serious science. Our colleague, Dr. Karen Cooper, has aggregated a lot of the outcomes from citizen scientists, and they're listed here on your screen. They've also been cited as co-authors on peer-reviewed papers, which is new, and we're excited to see that. But often, the citizen scientist is left out of those citations. So as we can see here, more than half of what we know about birds and the climate came from volunteers, although they're not cited in those reports. This whole slide here sums up what you've heard earlier, in particular David's talk about ECAST, Expert and Citizen Assessment of Science and Technology. We know that people can definitely do more than just collect data or share data or analyze data. And while this whole citizen science movement has been shown to increase adult science literacy, the public can also help inform research agendas and help determine how we use data. The limitations used to be fixed institutional barriers. That included limited access to data, the tools, communities, and expertise. And while those barriers are definitely lower than they had been before, there still are too few opportunities for people to engage in more meaningful ways. Some of those ways might involve non-deficit approaches. Typically, a citizen science project assumes that only the expert can set the research question, and only the expert has the answers. By thinking more creatively and more boldly about what it means to collaborate, what it really means to co-create some of these research agendas, what it means to work with the public to understand what their concerns are, what it means to develop responsible innovation and research development, we can start to move and have a profound impact on accelerating research and related innovation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Darlene, and to everyone on the panel for the presentations. So we would now like to open to questions, both here in Philadelphia and from those of you watching online. A reminder to those of you watching online, please sign in with your Google account, and you can access the question box via the YouTube feed. Before you ask your question, whether it's here or online, we ask that you please state your name and your affiliation. And if you're asking here in Philadelphia, please wait for the microphone to reach you so that we can all hear the question. So I open the floor. Do we have questions here?
Hi, my name is Chris Arsh. I'm actually the incoming Science Policy Fellow for ACS. So I have a question, basically generally for the panel. When you run these sorts of citizen science projects, do you collect demographic information to see who you're reaching? Is it people who are already have science backgrounds or people who are new to science and technology?
I'll just jump in. That's as diverse as science is. I mean, it depends on the project and it depends on the discipline.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Obviously, the project should fit what the project is asking for. So, for example, if we were investigating something to do with cancer incidence, we would be looking at, people with cancer and that sort of thing. If it's a geographically based thing, we'd be looking in that geographical arena. But I think your broader question is an important one, which is how do we make sure that we engage all of the populations, all of the people that might be interested in doing this. And there's a fair bit of research that's going into the how does one implement citizen science projects? How do you really reach out appropriately to different kinds of communities? How do you convey that message to different communities? And obviously one of the big lessons there is that you listen to the communities and what they're interested in and what they actually want to do and how they think you should convey it to the rest of the community.
Yeah, to answer that a little bit and respond to it, we have done some programs where we sort of sample demographically to try to get a semi-representative participant base when you're trying to sample to inform future policy. If you don't do that, you end up getting people who are, historically connected to science and the institutions that it touches. However, there seem to be some really great practices for helping to increase the diversity, even if you don't do that kind of demographic sampling, which can help you get a diverse group, but maybe not as many people who are participating. And we heard from Sophia how important it is to take advantage of the wide base of citizen science. So one thing that can really be quite useful is what Jennifer talked about co-creating a research agenda between scientists and communities who are impacted. Another way, I think, is to tap into youth. There's something special about young people and their connection to the issues that will impact them.
I'll just add that oftentimes these volunteers are hobbyists or people that are interested in whatever it might be, and so depending on how you might define their background, it varies. But that's really what motivates them to want to engage and participate. But I think it's also just important to consider, how do we engage all types of people, all types of stakeholders that are important to working on that particular challenge or problem. I think sometimes if we just work with scientists, that might only provide a certain view or a certain group of people. Sometimes you might want to target a certain project because they might be the only ones that can provide that useful resource or need. For example, there's a group of adventurers, and I forget the exact name, Adventures in Science, where these are people that can go to very extreme areas, but they can collect data in places and handle all the logistics for it that not a lot of other people can. So it's also leveraging the fact that certain people are in certain places or might have certain resources or expertise that's needed.
Okay, we have an online question from Christine Suh, Office of Public Affairs. Are there examples of specific policy changes that resulted from citizen science projects?
Not enough.
Uh-huh.
We can talk, should we talk about the NASA asteroid initiative? Why don't you talk about the outcomes?
So I mentioned the asteroid initiative, which was really the first example that we know of where the U.S. government hired a participatory technology assessment. By this we mean where we've got people to participate for a day and try to inform policy. That definitely provided input into the policy process. I think there are European models where this has been embedded from the very beginning. With the NASA one, I think what it's really allowed us to do, both in terms of providing input to that process and to NASA more generally, is help other people in the government understand understand the value of these kinds of things. That not only can regular, everyday citizens bring, their enthusiasm and creativity in solving problems and collecting data, but they also bring their values and their perspectives, because every one of them also is a decision maker. And so I think what it's really allowed us to do is to help people understand the potential value of having the people that are consumers and decision makers about technology every day, to put them in a more sort of deliberate role, intending to have them be part of the policy-making process. There are global models for this, and the U.S. is starting to realize the value here.
I'll just add one thing to that, because it's a little bit of an unfair question, because earlier when I cited that the citizen scientists don't usually get credit for the work that they're doing, that obviously there's been policies that have been informed by research data, and we should assume that some of that research data did come from citizen scientists.
Yeah, I have one thing to add. I think there are various examples. I can't think of any in particular to go into, but one that I'd like to share is the FCC has a speed test app, and James Miller, a colleague of mine, helped facilitate in bringing this together, where you just download an app and it basically tests your mobile broadband speed. And it's intended to basically crowdsource that information and get what is the real broadband speed, and have that be more of a data-driven approach to policymaking around broadband. So I think there are definitely examples out there more and more, and there's a lot of crowdsourced data we use, we just don't even realize.
Okay.
Can I just add one really quick one I just thought of? I apologize. The Long Beach port in Southern California is a really good example. There are moms who went out and gathered air quality data where the port was idling, the ships were idling, and ships were going in to pick up things. And the city and the public health and citizen researchers worked together to basically pass a law so that the boats couldn't idle anymore. They had to plug in.
Okay. We have another online question from a viewer named Mackenzie Lynn. And the question is, what is the outlook on incorporating citizen science into public education, especially as it motivates the next generation of scientists?
I think it's extremely important, and if anything, that's where an amazing untapped resource of volunteers exists, and especially because it shows how mutually beneficial that relationship is. These are students that are trying to learn about science, and we also have a lot of projects out there that need some type of volunteer work that could be used to also educate science, as well as engage the users in providing that information. So I think it's very important. There's a lot of different projects out there. For example, Youth Mappers, that's really trying to engage the education around geography and engaging people to help map. And so I think there's a lot of examples now out there.
It's also a very timely question if you are on Twitter, anybody out there, and you follow at SitSci. It's a science educator who is taking over that account this week, talking about citizen science in the classroom. And she's from a program called Students Discover, and they take existing citizen science projects and they find ways to fit them into the classroom too.
I think there are a lot of great opportunities, just to try not to overlap too much with what's said. Some of our initial work with developing this device, for example, actually was performed with our classes at BGSU. We had students in computer science creating the prototype apps for our data collection in the field. We had students in an inorganic chemistry class working on developing what essentially is this spectroscope. And that provided a great overlap to engage students in the course of their learning with real-world, meaningful projects, having to do with water quality, which impacted a number of our students with the water shutdown. And also an opportunity to work with community members who, many of whom, in the case of the Rotary Club that we're working with, there's 10 different area Rotary clubs that already had started to build up an interest in collecting water quality data on their own, and reached out to us for some help in improving the reliability of the data and the methods for collecting. So when it comes to education more broadly, even outside of the classroom, I think citizen science has a great opportunity to develop conversations, help many people learn about projects and issues that are important to them in their communities for a variety of reasons, and to begin to get involved. That's only going to help when we get more people talking. We have an informed electorate. We have people who are able to learn more about policy issues, about stakeholders, and it brings individuals to a table about matters that impact all of us.
I'm Tom Rickey from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, a DOE lab. And I'm just wondering, it's something Andrew just touched on briefly, about the reliability of data. I mean, a lot of scientists, right, they go to work for many, many years or decades, or, to school for decades to learn how to get a reliable data set. And I'm wondering if there have been any studies about the reliability of data through citizen science, or even like a controlled study like one would do with a clinical trial. Or if there are concerns. I mean, just the fact I have an aquarium and I have a test kit, and my wife and I look at these little strips of color, and we see totally different things. pH is high, pH is low.
Right.
And so there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing, and I'm wondering if it's a concern more broadly.
Yeah. If I can jump on that one, because this is a huge topic. Excuse me. Data reliability. I think it's not so much a question, are the data that citizen scientists produce reliable, is the wrong question. It's a matter of understanding the extent to which the data, can be trusted. And I want to use that word very carefully. Every decision we make on a day-to-day basis, if you're going to cross a street, when you cross a street, what you might eat for breakfast, we collect data about that, and we have to understand how reliable those data are in order to make a conclusion. So when we look at information produced by citizen scientists, it's not a question of are the data reliable, i.e., can they be used at all? It's more a matter of trying to understand how confident we can be in the limits of those data. And for example, in our case of water quality testing, many of the kits that our individuals use are these aquarium testing kits, the little dipsticks. You drop a dipstick in the water, it changes color, and that gives you an estimate, again with a cue card, for some contaminant concentration. Is that going to be accurate down to the 0.002 ppm? Of course not. But do we care in that case? I think we want to look at those data as an indication of if we have a huge body of participants that can have maybe 3 or 4 people monitoring the same site at the same time, or an agile participant body that can go out after every rainstorm. We're talking about accessing new data. And if what we have to do is consider instead not, is this 2 or 3 ppm nitrate concentration, but rather, is the water quality okay in that case, or is there some spike in concentration that deserves a follow-up? That, I think, is a very appropriate outcome, particularly if proper procedures and statistical validations and multiple measurements can be exploited to improve our confidence and make appropriate conclusions from this body of data. In my mind, the key point is citizen science provides access to types of data and data sets that aren't available through any other means because they can be so distributed, wide-ranging in number, and appropriate demographics, geographic or whatever. We just have to be cognizant about the limits of those data in order to draw appropriate conclusions.
Just going to add one quick thing. I think it's also just important to consider how we design these projects, and it's not only just putting it on the user or these participants that are providing this data, but it's oftentimes how we design it. And now we have the ability to collect a lot of passive information that we don't have to ask users to provide or participants to provide, and we can get really reliable data. So I think you have to think of the broader picture, but oftentimes the misconception within science is, I can't trust the data quality sucks, but it's actually, sometimes we use this crowdsourced data to ground truth our authoritative scientific information.
I would just say, my colleagues here have said it really well, but I think it's matching the study to the question, right? So citizen science allows you to collect some types of data you wouldn't get any other way. It allows you to collect a lot of data, and you just have to think about which study question, which research project is actually right for these kinds of different citizen science and crowdsourcing approaches, not just sort of replacing one for the other, but really sort of matching the study design to what the question is that you're asking and matching the appropriate technologies to the question that you're asking, and then knowing what the data really can and can't tell you in those cases.
have a question here in Philadelphia.
Yes, I have a question. Preston McDougall from Middle Tennessee State University, and excited person to host a public forum on building with biology on should we engineer the mosquito. But the question is about financial resources. Very often the government can give grants to do this. Sometimes you get students like at Bowling Green that can volunteer app development and instrument design. But sometimes you need private support. And a friend of mine was a chair of chemistry at Oxford. He started 15 years ago this screensaver that's a lifesaver. And it was funded by a major global semiconductor company for several years. And I don't know if some of you may have seen this. It was the design drugs using artificial intelligence and screensavers all over the world. He once used to joke he had 300,000 graduate students. But they actually, last I heard, there was a pancreatic cancer drug that was in phase 3 clinical trials that came from a lead from somebody running a screensaver. So sometimes you need large, financial resources. Can anybody speak to whether it's important? If you want to keep it citizen, maybe you don't want to have industry involvement, but sometimes you do need resources. Can anybody speak to that?
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
I'll just start with saying that, sort of to flip it a little, and then feel free to answer this as a follow-on. University of Washington researchers looked at over, I forget exactly now how many, 300 different citizen science projects related to biodiversity, and they found that around 2 million volunteers showed an economic value of $2.5 billion per year. So in some ways, there are situations where, yes, having the right resources are important to get this type of project started. It's not something that can be done free, for sure. There's definitely a lot of logistical aspects in coordinating, especially with millions of volunteers or developing technology to coordinate that. But it's also recognizing, what kind of value that they provide in return. And in some ways, they can provide that competitive advantage for a company. But for us, it could save us a lot of money if we were to hire someone to actually do the same kind of work. So I'll just pass it along there.
I think that was an eloquent answer. The only thing I'd add to it is just that we are at a time when people are really starting to recognize the value of this kind of stuff. And Sophia talked about the citizenscience.gov portal. And I think there's a real opportunity to catalyze that in a viral way. People are really starting to realize the value of what people bring to this kind of research, and in particular, the kind of information that you can get both in terms of scientific data and in terms of societal perspectives that we get in a bunch of other ways, but we don't necessarily get in ways that we can put together and trust.
I would just put in a plug for private industry, and I would actually like to see more companies involved in this for sustaining the practice, because we have the federal catalog here. But the fact of the matter is, if the administration changes hands, we don't know what happens with the movement, and I would hate to see that go away. We have many of the projects supported by grants. So we develop communities to get involved in these projects. 2-3 years later, the project is over. It's done. So for the ability for people to remain engaged in these projects, it may take a little shot in the arm with more outside sustainable income.
And where I have seen private industry in some ways contributing is through hackathons, through putting a little bit of money for someone to win a final prize for developing the best app or something like that. And that's one way in which we can see how, money can spur a certain kind of interest and motivation.
Hi, I'm Sarah Mullins. I'm a ACS member from Minnesota. And we have a lot of water there and a lot of people interested in monitoring the water, which we care about quite a lot. My question is, when you have these geographically distributed data collection, do you ever have, what opportunity does the citizen scientist have to check back in on what happened? Either just to know what was the result of all the information, or are there any efforts to actually collect those people into one location and kind of debrief, kind of understand a little bit better what they just participated in?
It's a great question. This is one of the things that we've been trying to focus on is with regards to engagement and feedback. People, for their participation, They're motivated to participate for a number of reasons. That continuation often depends on getting something back, meaning some feedback, some appreciation or perception that what they're doing makes a difference. So, part of what we've tried to embed into our apps is some simple visualization tools that give some immediate feedback. For example, in the case of some of these aquarium test kits that are all color-based, with one of our apps where you design a question that gets posed to a crowd to collect information using GPS coordinates on a cell phone wherever you are in the field. The way that gets distributed to the cell phones, when a user goes to upload an answer in the field, they have a selection choice where the colors are matched to whatever test kit you're using. So as you upload a number of answers and you've got 150 data points, you can see at a glance what the colors mean just by recognizing on the cue card. You can see all the different data points. So we're trying to make some choices about to facilitate people getting that feedback right away. We're not going to send out a 6-month, or semi-annual report on this. They're supposed to get information right away. We're also working with the groups the different Rotary clubs to help have some of those conversations for themselves. And there's some really big issues, which I'm sure we don't have time to fully vet here, about how do we make sure that non-expert, non-professional citizen scientists draw appropriate conclusions on their own. There are certainly some big issues there, but we're trying to have conversations to help provide the participants with that meaningful feedback right away to sustain their efforts. And going forward, this is a big topic for sure.
Yeah, I would just add to that, it's a huge question. Obviously, this return of results, it cuts across all these different areas of science. And how do you accurately and appropriately reflect the overall results of a study back to the participants? So, for example, just me sending them the Nature article that came from the study is not really going to cut it, right? But the capability that we have of making fancy websites that are interactive and doing things, it can be limited. And so people investigate a lot of different ways to do that. But I think what Andrew is saying rings true across a lot of the biomedical space too, which is that the rapid return of information is really valuable. People are interested and engaged. And if they get something back from it quickly, and we see this a lot in the game space where, you get that immediate feedback of how well you're doing, how you're doing compared to others, you're working with other people, you're competing, you're seeing, the effects of what you're doing. And those kinds of rapid feedback sustain involvement in some of these game-based projects.
I think that the online crowdsourcing projects do have a benefit there where they can help enable and foster peer-to-peer communication among their participants. David and I are involved with a National Science Foundation project right now where we're doing 100 interviews with people, and we're learning that the number one reason people drop out of a project is because they never hear back from the project owner. So it is definitely a problem still.
And I'll just add that, that's actually the number one reason I think for a lot of volunteers to want to engage is that there is a community that develops, whether it be formally through the project owners that create that space, like a forum of some kind, or oftentimes, if there isn't one, a lot of volunteers create their own forum, create their own community because it helps to share their practice of how they're engaging and volunteering. But it helps them, it motivates them to want to continue to participate.
All right, we have time for one last question. We see it, one ready here in Philadelphia. Wait for the microphone.
My name's Mary Beckman, and I'm at the Pacific Northwest National Lab too. I'm kind of curious about the accidental citizen scientist, and I guess this might be a question for Sophia. With the crowdsourced stuff, what percentage of people aren't really aware that they're doing science, and what happens when they find out? Do we know that?
That's an interesting question and statistic. I don't think I can answer or know exactly. And I think it might not be an exact number. I mean, I think we are increasingly have apps we use, data that we're all using that we don't even probably realize half the time if it is crowdsourced or citizen science. I think it just depends on how you define those terms, which have some gray area. But we increasingly have a lot of data that we are all sharing, and even just if you use Facebook, posting, what's a good restaurant in Philly that I should go to? That's sort of crowdsourcing. Now, that's at a very minimal level, but I think it's about really opening and being broad about how we engage people to enhance what we are trying to do. So I'll kind of simplify my answer. I don't know if anyone else has any stats they know.
Maybe just eBird. eBird was an application that was really set up to be a functional resource for bird watchers. It was basically an electronic journal. So it's an asset for them, and the trade-off is they can use that tool, but the data they submit will be used to advance areas of research as well.
Yeah, that's how the Christmas bird count was really how a lot of people explain, citizen science has been going on for a long time. This is not new, even though the technology, the social technology, and all these sensors are making it available, but there's many ways in which we have already been using this data to provide information on a variety of societal issues. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panelists again, Sophia, Andrew, Jennifer, David, and Darlene, and all of you here in Philadelphia for attending, and everyone online who's been watching. The archive version of this session will soon be posted to http://bit.ly/ACS Live Philadelphia. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us for our next press conference that will be today at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And it's on the topic of an ingestible battery that could have a possible use in future medical devices. So thank you very much, and everyone have a pleasant day.